in the gallium study, the overall survival curves were virtually superimposable, but the adverse event profile was slightly higher for the non-fatal adverse events with obinutuzumab.
That's correct.
Do you think that mitigates against the standard use of obinutuzumab?
I don't think it does, because I think what we're trying to achieve here is the longest possible first remission. And as we know, second and subsequent remissions tend to be shorter. So I think there is an advantage in being in remission for longer. First of all, you may be able to get the same treatment again when the disease comes back. And even if you can't, you may be able to be susceptible to new therapies which will keep the disease at bay. So I think that so long as we can control serious adverse events, then I think being in remission for longer is beneficial.
Now, in the question and answer session, many of your colleagues, notably Dr. Rai,
Yeah.
but others, questioned whether this really should, whether your recommendations of a change in practice and standard of care are warranted given the data that you've seen thus far.
I think clinicians tend to be cautious, and unless you've got some transformational event like we saw with, let's say, imatinib in CML, this is an incremental change, and you have to always weigh up safety and toxicity against benefit. But the primary endpoint is progression-free survival, and it was met, and the progression-free survival was significantly longer in the obinutuzumab arm. As long as they're aware of the safety issues and you can tailor the chemotherapy regimen according to the age, frailty and comorbidity of the patient, I don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't be actively considering the substitution of obinutuzumab for rituximab in these patients.
Now, the introducer, if you would like to call him that, Dr. Leonard, mentioned the possibility of a dose effect, and I believe that you had said that there are different monoclonal antibodies and therefore does that explain the difference? What are the differences between the antibodies?
Well, I think that I would reiterate a number of points I made at the presentation. The first is that this is a different antibody working by a different mechanism, and there's no reason why the dosage should be the same inherently. Secondly, there's no evidence in any randomized trial that increasing the dose of rituximab increases benefit. Certainly not in follicular lymphoma, and also not in diffuse large cell lymphoma either in randomized trial studies. The third thing is that we know that rituximab maintenance treatment at given 8 weekly maintains therapeutic levels. So I think we are giving an effective dose of rituximab. We also did the analysis of age, gender, weight, surface area, tumor volume and bulk disease, and in none of these did we see an additional benefit over and above the standard benefit for obinutuzumab. And especially in those patients with bulk disease and high tumor volume, we didn't see any further benefit over and above the average for the trial. So that suggests there isn't an extra benefit from dosage, that it's actually the antibody itself which is superior. Now, you could argue perhaps that we should have done a third arm in the trial, giving rituximab at high dose, but again, there's no evidence that increasing dosage of rituximab increases benefit.
I see. And Leslie, one more question, please. A question that's very important both in the UK and in the United States about costs, especially with rituximab reaching the end of its patent. Is it justified by what are the costs, do we know?
I think, I'm not trying to be neglectful, if you like, of economics here, but this, as they say, is not a matter for me. I think that the pricing, funding, licensing will all be a matter for company and the regulatory and the financial authorities. And I think the payers will have to decide in conjunction with industry whether or not this represents a cost-effective intervention. What we can do as clinical trialists, and I'm not being snobbish or po-faced about it, what we can do as clinical trialists is to say, here are the data, we've done a trial, and I think the costing and the funding mechanisms are actually outside our control.